The battlefield was still smoldering when the council called for him. Commander Riven Locke, the human war hero known across 3 star systems, stood before the assembly of alien nobles. His armor was scorched, one eye patched from the blast that had nearly ended him. Behind him, the banners of victory fluttered in the artificial breeze. He had done the impossible, defeated the warlord Krax and shattered the Zulthian armada. And now, tradition dictated he receive a reward. Anything he wanted. Gold. Planets. Ships. Instead, Riven pointed at the back of the chamber, where a small, trembling figure cowered behind the columns. She was barely 5 feet tall, with pale green skin and enormous eyes. She wore no armor, had no weapons, and looked like she'd break under a stiff breeze. "I want her," he said calmly. The chamber erupted in gasps and murmurs. That girl was from the Virelli, considered the weakest species in the Alliance. She'd been a servant, a background figure, unnoticed and unvalued. Her name was Elya, and no one had expected her to even survive the war. A counselor stepped forward. "Commander, surely you jest. She has no rank. No skill. She is not a warrior." "I wasn't given a limit on my choice," Riven said. "She's who I want." That was the beginning of something no one saw coming. When Elya was brought to his ship, she didn't speak. She barely looked up. In her eyes was the same fear he'd seen in civilians from raised colonies, the hollow look of someone expecting to be discarded again. But Riven didn't treat her like a servant. He didn't even treat her like a recruit. He gave her a room, not a cell, and placed her in basic combat training. The crew laughed. A Virelli? In armor? The first few weeks were brutal. Elya collapsed every day. Couldn't lift a rifle. Cried herself to sleep. But Riven never raised his voice. He simply said one thing over and over. "You don't know what you are yet." As weeks turned into months, she started changing. Not just physically, though she did grow stronger. She learned to handle weapons. She learned how to fight in 0G. But more than that, she began to believe. Riven taught her not as a commander, but as a mentor. He showed her how to use her species' natural speed and reflexes, how to read opponents before they moved. He taught her that strength wasn't always in muscle, it was in will. In precision. One day, during a simulated boarding drill, she took down 3 larger cadets using nothing but her environment and her speed. No one laughed after that. Then the real test came. A rogue fleet of mercenaries ambushed a border world. Riven's ship was the only one in range. It was a suicide mission. He could have ordered the crew to hold back, to wait for reinforcements. But he didn't. He called for volunteers. Elya was the first to step forward. The assault was chaos. Fire, screaming metal, decompression. Elya moved through it like a shadow, cutting through enemy lines, leading others with a clarity and calmness that stunned even veterans. When Riven was cornered in the reactor core, bleeding from a shattered ribcage, it was Elya who reached him. She pulled him out, fought off 2 mercenaries, and carried him back to the extraction point. She'd saved him. And more than that, she'd led the charge that saved the colony. When they returned, she wasn't a shadow anymore. She stood tall at the debriefing. Her voice didn't shake when she gave her report. And when the council summoned them again, the murmurs were gone. Silence reigned as the High Commander spoke. For actions above and beyond the call of duty, for valor and leadership, Elya of Virelli is hereby promoted to combat lieutenant of the Allied forces. Riven watched her with a faint smile. She looked over at him, confused and a little overwhelmed. "You turned me into this," she whispered after the ceremony. "No," he replied. "I just removed the cage. You did the rest." In the years that followed, tales of Elya spread across the stars. Not because she was powerful, or ruthless, but because she was the girl no one believed in, until one man did. And that belief lit a fire that no army could extinguish. They used to mock the weakest. Now they feared her name.